Okay, well, once again, thank you all for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started with our presentation. Jane has a great resume here that is really long, but I'll just read some of it. Jane Kloeckner is an environmental law attorney and teacher. In her role as an attorney, Jane worked as a senior environmental attorney advisor at the U.S. EPA, Region 7, Kansas City. While there, her work involved enforcement of environmental laws and regulations on hazardous substances, mining waste, and legal counseling on environmental justice, federal Indian law, tribal consultation, and protection of Indian reservations from environmental pollution and contamination. In her role as a teacher, she has taught for 18 years as an adjunct professor for the graduate and law students of the University of Kansas, Kansas City of Missouri. Various subjects included federal environmental law, nature and society, federal Indian law, environmental justice, climate change laws, and social change. So in 2022, Jane completed a 2-year course of study on Christian and other religious mystics and prophets at the Living School Center for Action and Contemplation in New Mexico. So anyway, and she can share more about herself. She's got a wide breadth of knowledge, of experience and expertise, not only in the law, but also in the faith community and in environmentalism. And so without further ado, we'll turn it over to Jane Kloeckner, and let's give her a round of applause.
So one of the things that I have learned over the years in teaching and also in the latter part of my career at EPA was before I gave a talk or before I give a lecture, I like to take 3 deep breaths, and this helps me relax. And I got this from Forbes Executive Coaches Council. So it's kind of generic. You can use it before you have a conversation with a loved one, maybe a difficult conversation, or any time when you want to be calm going into a discussion. And some of the things I have to say tonight are kind of serious. And some of the things I have to say tonight are very uplifting because there has been some progress and then some not so good things. So with that in mind, I thought we could start with taking 3 deep breaths. Also, I wanted to share this beautiful icon of Mary of the Cosmos because a certain person introduced me to sustainable sanctuaries, and her name was Sister Rose Therese Hosselman. She passed away some time ago, but she came to EPA and gave a talk a long time ago. And I was like, wow, who is this person? I've got to meet her. And the next thing you know, I'm involved with sustainable sanctuaries. So I'm forever indebted to Rose Therese. And this was an icon that I received from her and I have hanging on my wall. And I just think it is so beautiful, representing the Mother, Father, God that protects the universe. But anyway, arrive with mindfulness. So if you want to close your eyes, if you want to leave them open and gently look down, I will get us all to breathe 3 deep breaths together. So take a seat, breathe in and open to your body. Let go of stress. Whatever happened today that got you here, let it go and relax as you breathe out. Breathe in again and open up to your feelings. Become alert as you breathe out. Last time we breathe in, we open to the right now. There is no place else to go. There is nothing else to do. Just be here now. What's next right now as we breathe out? And you can open your eyes. Thank you for indulging me with that. This is the title of my talk today, but I have to say it was kind of something I inherited from Chick Keller who I see there on the Zoom call. And he did Climate Change, the Real Solution, Part 1, Adaptation. And when I saw that, I was very excited about his talk. And I thought about, well, there's a lot more to the real solution, and that's called mitigation. And so that's what I want to talk about tonight. And I want to do a few things and elaborate on that. Of course, just a quick definition. What do we mean by mitigation? What does it look like right there in Prairie Village, where many of you are sitting, as well as what does it look like in the greater Kansas City metro area? Why do we even need to mitigate? Maybe we just adapt. And then I want to talk to you about fixing the climate, strategies for an uncertain world. This is a book that I use over at Kansas University at the Edwards campus, and it's excellent. It is dated 2022, so I know that it needs an update. But since we're talking about climate solutions, and the title of this book is Fixing the Climate, but notice the subtitle, Strategies for an Uncertain World. As Chick pointed out a few months ago, there's a lot of uncertainty here, and it will take decades for us to develop all the innovations and all the technology that we need, even though many solutions are already underway. So I really like the title. I really like this book. It's Charles Sable, the primary author from University of Columbia or Columbia University. So that's where we're going tonight. So first of all, what is climate mitigation? What are we talking about? Many of you already know this. I know that you've been thinking about climate change for a long time now, decades, some of us. But just to go over quickly, actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We'll talk and define what a greenhouse gas is just a little, and eventually slow down and reverse the effects of climate change. And we'll talk about the effects of climate change in a little bit too. So what about these strategies for an uncertain world? Mainly, we're talking about energy transition, an energy transition to renewable energy and away from the status quo, which is generally speaking, burning fossil fuels. But also there are other things we can do that count towards mitigation, simply increasing our energy efficiency, improving land use practices, et cetera, et cetera. There are more things we can do. So what the heck's going on out there in Prairie Village and right there at the church where y'all are sitting? It's a wonderful thing that's going on. We are actually doing mitigation by hosting this meeting tonight. I know that's the fourth bullet down, but the church integrates environmental practices and thinking into their worship. They support education, such as talks like this. They have done things at their facility to reduce their carbon footprint, energy efficient measures, insulating the walls, the attic, sealing air leaks, installing new windows and appliances. All of that is big. That's energy efficiency. They hold electric and hybrid car expos in the church parking lot. I've been to those. They're really fun and they are educational, and they encourage people to do things like get an electric car. And then one of the things that was really cool, the very first ever Kansas City Climate Change Summit for the Kansas City Climate Action Group was held right there at the Village Church. So, kudos to the church. What's going on there in Prairie Village that we can count as mitigation of climate change? Lots of good things. The city has adopted a municipal climate action plan just not even 2 years ago, just barely 2 years ago. And they are going to work on achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And we'll talk a little bit more today about what does that really mean, net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and why is that a goal for 2050? And then another thing, the city council and city leaders are doing is to develop a community climate action plan for not only city operations, but for the people that live there, for the businesses that have their place of operation there. So to mitigate and eliminate their carbon emissions. So kudos to Prairie Village. Broader or more broadly in the Kansas City metro area, many of you are familiar with Climate Action Kansas City, and they have developed a climate action plan with the help of the Mid-America Regional Council as their partner. And they have chapters on various things that municipalities can do to reduce emissions as well as adapt. So there are things going on right here in our community, in our broader metro area, right here, even in the heartland, in the Midwest, that people are putting together to achieve this net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And again, now that Kansas Climate Action KC summits have been so successful, they had their 4th meeting here in 2025 and continues to be wildly successful with hundreds of people attending. A little bit more about what's going on in Kansas City. Everybody knows that lives here. We have a new airport. That's controversial, of course, anytime you have that big of a construction project. But in developing this, they not only adapted to climate change, they mitigated the emissions during construction and for the foreseeable future. For example, they're using electric buses with charging stations, wireless electric buses, and that's really a wonderful mitigation effort. Now, they also have a parking garage with solar panels, 510 solar panels, equivalent of 20 average homes. They also have electric vehicle charging stations and even charging stations on their surface lot. This is probably the most interesting thing, or another interesting thing that can and hopefully will be undertaken, is 100% renewable energy to run the airport with on-site solar panels. So yeah, it's a little behind schedule. There's some lengthy negotiations between the city of Kansas City and their developer. The developer includes Evergy, Burns and McDonald, Herzog, and a transportation contractor called Sabian. So there's city tax break to support this project, the solar farm. So we're hoping that it will begin in 2026 or maybe 2027. So this is mitigation, pure and simple, straight up, right in our own backyard. So, I forgot to say at the beginning, if you have questions, I can see you because they put the camera on the crowd, and someone's monitoring the chat. So raise your hand anytime you want to interrupt and ask questions. I will try to respond, but we'll also hopefully have time for questions at the end. But why is it so crucial to have this mitigation? We cannot just rely on adaptation. But the thing is that we want to prevent climate change. We want to lessen the effects of climate change, including rising temperatures, extreme weather events, sea level rise. All of those things are very problematic. Before this meeting, some folks were in the audience talking about their plans to go to Hawaii. What's going to happen in Hawaii? They're going to have to spend billions of dollars to protect their shore. And that's because Hawaii is a rich state and we're a rich country. What about other poor countries? Sea level rise, they won't have the funds to create seawalls and prevent destruction of their coastlines. And what will happen? People will die. So we want to lessen the effects and prevent this change. And believe it or not, mitigation is the most cost-effective response. And I have some data in this presentation to show you about the cost-effectiveness of mitigation. Plus, besides that, we get all these benefits. That benefits our global economy, our local economy. It has social and economic economic equity issues can be benefited by mitigation. We can benefit our human health, food security, and even ecosystems. My sources for this talk are all at the end in the reference, but once in a while you'll see I put the source on the slide. So what I look at a lot is called the National Climate Assessment that's done every 4 years by the United States government. So mostly what I'm going to talk about is climate mitigation in the United States. However, I have a few slides on global climate mitigation. And so the 5th National Climate Assessment came out in 2023, and that is produced by an organization called the United States Global Change Research Project. Some of you know it. And when you see this last bullet there that talks about all these substantial benefits, you can go to the 5th National Climate Change Assessment, and you can find 1 or 2 chapters of data and information on every single one of those benefits, including the food security, the ecosystem benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm hoping that you will take home from this presentation some of the resources and want to do some more of your own investigation about mitigation. So as I said, I am going to share with you a little bit about some global data. And so when we talk about this mitigation and how it can be a benefit, one of the things that it does is it creates jobs. And so there is an international labor organization that is keeping track of the renewable energy jobs. And as of 2023, we have over 13.7 million jobs that were created just in 2022 around the planet. And so this is really positive, just thinking about it from that point of view. And of course, there's more data in the fifth National Climate Assessment about the jobs created just in the US. Global energy is going a momentous transformation. And Chick Teller talked about this. It has market forces based on the cost of the renewables per kilowatt or per joule, however you want to measure the production of energy. So there are just market forces at work as well, but they're not going fast enough. And we have countervailing market forces, such as fossil fuel consumption subsidies. For the first time, rose above $1 trillion globally. That's a little scary. But what we need to do is make this transition because this is kind of, in addition to energy efficiency, reducing our dependence on fossil fuels is kind of the low-hanging fruit. That's how we can make some significant advances in mitigating climate change, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Another thing that's really important as we go through a just energy transition is what are our goals? And so we know that from various modeling, there's different ways of looking at it. I mentioned before, we have this net zero pathway that we all want to achieve. And I'll talk more about what that means, but it's basically between now and 2050. And here, this chart is 30 years. We're now down to 25 years. But there's various ways of looking at how to achieve this and what it does for job gains. Is there a question? Okay, so the first chart you see there, where it goes 2020 to 2050, is called high electrification. And that model assumes that this was data put together in 2021, that we would have nearly all buildings and transportation electrified, but no constraints, no rules on how to do that, no regulatory limitations on vehicles and buildings. The second one produces energy with 100% renewable, and you can see what that does to job creation. You know, it goes up to 6 million net jobs created over this 30-year period. And then the last one, where there's not a lot of job gain, and of course there will be job losses in the fossil fuel sector, but look at the gains in all the other sectors. So then the last one, where it says renewable constrained, that is where the renewable energy doesn't really take off, and instead we continue to rely on fossil fuel energy with carbon capture and storage as our solution, which is, as you know, a very expensive proposition. So I think of that last option there as sort of like a business as usual, and just letting the market forces and not trying to constrain any fossil fuel energy. So that's pretty significant benefit of going with mitigation, and perhaps job creation you can see with renewables. And then I was talking a little bit about social equity and why the International Energy Agency really supports the idea that we could get more women in selected energy related occupations. You can see there the data from 2023. It's pretty minuscule. Not very many women are in these areas where jobs are needed. We need more people to do this, particularly if we go in the direction of 100% renewables. We're going to need people to fill these positions. And so we want to make sure there's a just energy transition that supports social equity. And this includes strengthening the participation of women in the workforce. Approximately 40% of the workforce is made up of women, but only 20% work in energy selected fields. So there's going to be a way to retrain and reskill women for the just energy transition. And I neglected to mention earlier that the just energy transition must also take care of those people that are going to lose their jobs because they work in fossil fuel sector. So that's really important that they get retraining and reskilling. And so these are some of the benefits of having more women in these fields. It's a fundamental human right. You get more diversity, obviously, in your workforce, and you get more innovation, productivity, profitability. I mean, it just goes on and on by having a more balanced workforce. But for my own experience in life, and many of you can probably comment, I have never seen a woman roofer, although my sister-in-law did try roofing for a while when she was young. So I never saw her at work, but it's pretty rare. So what we see on those vocational occupations, electrician, concrete, welder, plumber, roofer, all those are needed, but you have maybe at most 3% right now women. So we have a lot of room to grow there. My students last semester told me and one of them was a crew chief on a group in a business where they installed the large windmills, and a lot of the people in that crew were actually women. So women are stepping up, and if you look at the leadership in renewables, it is really expanding for women leadership. So that's my push for one of the social equity benefits of moving into more and more mitigation. So let me move on. So as I told you, I was going to mention a little bit about costs, and that's where everybody said, oh my gosh, it's going to cost so much, cost. It's much better to consider this as an investment so that we can reap those benefits that I talked about before in terms of social benefits, as well as, not to mention the environmental benefits. I didn't even mention the environmental benefits of no longer burning fossil fuels and the health effects that that will have. for people that live near those fossil fuel facilities. But here is what we need to do, and these are global numbers. 3.5 trillion needs to be invested globally over and once a year for the next 30 years. Now, this is 2021 to 2050, so it's probably, it may even be a little more now because we haven't done as much as we should. But you can see the estimates vary. Energy Transmission Commission, which is where you see this graph came from this commission, they said the 3.5. But also, interestingly, the World Economic Forum matches that in their estimate, 3.5 annually. And then even one of our big news reporters has estimated 1 to 2 trillion years per year, 1 to 2 trillion dollars per year. So you can see a lot of things are on this chart, even carbon removal, which is somewhat speculative as to how expensive that will be. It's not exactly working out well right now, but it may come online and it may be beneficial because this transition is not going to eliminate all fossil fuel burning in one fell swoop. It's going to take some time. So that's when we get talking about net zero. Net zero is an important concept. I'm going to spend a couple minutes on that. But this is a nice chart. I don't have the reference here, but I believe it comes from the data to make this chart came from the United States Environmental Protection Agency based on its inventory of United States greenhouse gas emissions and sinks. That inventory is critical, and you can see it started in 1990, well before greenhouse gases were even identified as air pollutants, which happened around 97. So for a long time, the United States has been inventorying its greenhouse gas emissions. So then this is a good thing. And we had, our gases were just going up and up and up and up and up. And through 1990 through about 2005, 2006, in that time frame, we had a steady increase for the most part. But then around 2005, things started to go down. Our emissions went down about 20%. And you can see that huge dip during the pandemic there, 2019. So I just want to elaborate a little bit more on what the heck is all this net zero emissions. And you can see here, we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, not just CO2. This, I just wanted you to see, in case if you could see the dates a little better, get rid of those words there. So you can see a little bit about that dip in the pandemic and the general increase up to 2005. So just as a little review, there are the 6 greenhouse gases, and they were decided to be air pollutants by the United States Environmental Protection Agency officially in, I want to say 2007, but it may have been 2009, sorry. But anyway, that was after the United States Supreme Court ordered EPA to make a decision, because EPA was kind of sitting on the fence for a decade when people had petitioned EPA to make a decision. Are these gases air pollutants or not? And so finally the decision was made, and that's called the greenhouse gas finding. And since then, there have been many regulations to control these gases. So what are they? There are 6 gases. They're called well-mixed gases because they mix well in the atmosphere. They don't just hang around by themselves. And remember that even though carbon dioxide is 76%, you can have gases like methane. Oh yeah, that's only 16%, but it's much more potent. And then the other thing besides potency is how long do these gases stay in the air? Well, carbon dioxide stays in the air for 100 years. So the more that we put in now today, the longer it will be up there in our atmosphere. So what is this goal? Again, net zero is reaching this balance between the sources of greenhouse gases, what they're putting out into the atmosphere, and removing them. But you don't just have to remove them by shutting off all the sources. You can eliminate or offset those emissions with other actions, such as reforestation, carbon capture. I call it experimental. That's probably a little bit of an overstatement. It seems to work, but maybe not at the scale needed to capture as much fossil fuel as some people want to burn. So the last thing is, as I said, net zero does not mean no greenhouse gas emissions. These fluorinated gases, nitrous oxide, there are other sources. Sources of methane include natural gas, which is really important right now in our society as we transition away from burning coal. And nitrous oxide can come from fertilizers and farming practices. So we're not really trying to eliminate every single greenhouse gas from our atmosphere. We're trying to reduce them so that, then we can also provide what are called sinks, places that will absorb that carbon, for example. So here's just a little graphic that explains a little more. So as I was just saying, you have to have these offsets. So that's why you see net zero, and then there's a negative carbon CO2 equivalent, greenhouse gas equivalent below that in the green, and that's land use, because this is a chart for the United States, and we are lucky that we have some land uses that are a carbon sink and can take some of that carbon. And then as you go up and you see the net emissions, that accounts for that loss, it accounts for that reduction of greenhouse gases in land use up at the top, so that the dark black line is a little bit low, like at 5,500 CO2 equivalent million metric tons. So we keep talking about 2005 as our comparison, and that's because it was the peak. That was our peak. So let's keep moving down. We've really only moved down 3% since 1990. So we have a long way to go. And this chart certainly explains that we have a long way to go if we're going to get to net zero in 2050, where we can offset our greenhouse gas emissions. This is another way. Now, I don't particularly like this graphic, but it was a nice, colorful graphic, and it came from this organization, netzeroclimate.org. What is net zero? And it talks about durable net zero, which is a really nice concept, where the emissions from fossil fuel industries will be reduced substantially, and the human-induced carbon flow will be balanced, not only, but we'll get temperature stability. And that's what we really want, is temperature stability. We don't want the temperature to keep going up because of all the effects of a higher temperature. And as you may be quite well aware by now, we have an international agreement called the Paris Agreement, which we in the United States are no longer a party to, but it marked the beginning of the shift towards the net zero, towards a durable net zero. So that is our goal as an international community, is to reach that durable net zero. And probably some of you are familiar. I know many people in the audience are familiar with Project Drawdown, which came out some 10 years ago or so. And it explicitly, it was 2017, so not quite 10 years, but it explicitly supports and promotes achieving a durable net zero, so that they define that as a point and the rate of greenhouse gas emissions matches the rate of greenhouse gas removal. So they not only want to balance, they want to draw down and remove some of these gases. Now, as I just mentioned, how did this goal come about? It came about because of international agreements. The United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. I don't want to spell it all out, but that's UNFCCC, has been around for decades. And even in that document, there was an aspiration to limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius increase by 2050. And that 2 degrees Celsius increase is over the industrial era, so that we can go to even before 1990 and reduce, only allow an increase of 2 degrees. Then the Paris Agreement, there was a Kyoto Protocol before that, and it was kind of a failure, but it did make some advances. And then finally, the international community came together in its wisdom, in its jus cogens, said, oh, Latin for the community gets together and understands this is a standard. So what some people are calling the Paris Agreement in this convention on climate change is really sort of the consciousness of the entire world, where we are saying climate science has told us that we must limit warming to 2 degrees. And here we have James Hansen in a recent article from The Guardian a few years ago, when this massive report came out in the United States and the International Panel on Climate Change. And these reports are warning, giving us a warning, watch out. We all said 2 degrees was okay, but really 1.5 degrees Celsius is a landmark that we don't want to pass. We've got the warning. And why is James Hansen so critical? Yes, he's an adjunct at Columbia University, but look at his credentials, a NASA scientist for decades. And he provided advice to President George Herbert Walker Bush in the 1980s about climate change, and said, we've got to do something. So this has been going on for a very long time, that the scientists have been telling us. And then here you can read this article about his comments more recently, 2018, that say we must limit the potential for this catastrophe, for floods and drought and extreme heat and poverty. And now best if we could keep it under 1.5. But then he also notes that 2 degrees, well, it at least would take us into this uncharted territory. It's somewhat dangerous because they're above the Holocene era. And therein lies a whole big question about our Earth history. And our Earth history is very interesting. We have the Holocene era, 11,700 years ago. It started about the same time as civilizations and humans had prospered with our agriculture and our various magnificent ways of living and all the science. And we can look to the stars, we can look at the small molecules inside our body. It seems that this Holocene era is just perfect for us and for our development. And to me, this is spiritually significant, that this is a period of time on the planet in which human civilization developed. It's a sweet spot on the planet. And if we go up to 1,000 part per million CO2, I mean, God forbid that we would ever get up there, but whoever thought we would be at 426 part per billion? So if we were to ever get up to 1,000, we'd be in trouble, because that's the Cretaceous period, which is like 144 million years ago, or all the way through 66 million years ago. And that climate, we probably could not survive. And then there's sort of an in-between place, 2.5 million years ago, called the Pleistocene. And that does not guarantee that we would be off the hook. That's why he says it's well above the Holocene. If we're heading for a Pleistocene planet, it's going to be hot. Then it might cool down a little bit, then it's going to be hot. And so it's a fluctuating temperature. We probably don't want to live. We don't want to pass on that kind of hardship to generations in the future. So that's what the common sense consciousness of the international community is telling us, that the climate science that is dominant among scientists is telling us. However, there are other theories. There's the climate economical theory, and some of the oil producing countries are very interested in this theory. And I suppose we now have to say that the United States is one of these countries now. We're surely an oil producing country. Are we going to buy into the 3 degrees Celsius increase by 2100 is okay? The best guess, according to Professor William Nordhaus of Yale University, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics for this very theory about climate change, is that his best guess is that economic damages from the climate change, even if we do nothing, business as usual, will be on the order of 2.5% of world output. So the global GDP will be curtailed by 2.5% by 2100, and damages will be concentrated in low-income tropical regions in Africa and India. So that means, we can live with it, we can adapt, and we don't have to intervene. It's hard to say the words, but this is a theory from Professor Nordhaus, and he's written books. He won the Nobel Prize for this very theory, even though he does acknowledge that climate change is a major threat. So that's a little concerning. Other people, other economists on the planet have looked at some of these economic models, including the DICE model, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. And they have said that the global economy could face a loss more like 50% of global GDP in between now and 2070 or maybe 2090 if we do nothing. And who are these other people criticizing? They're the insurance people, the actuaries from United Kingdom, Institute of Actuaries, January 2025. So yeah, this is 10 years ago when Professor Nordhaus wrote this book, developed the model, and then won the prize. So, following Professor Nordhaus from 10 years ago is pretty darn risky when the insurance actuaries are saying, wait a minute. And also, Professor Nordhaus had a partner, Professor Martin Weitzman, and he was from Harvard University Economics. And Professor Weitzman was one of the most well-respected economists in his field, and based on research papers in economics, one of the best journals there. And his research was focused on environmental economics, specifically climate change and economic catastrophes. And so he found that the problem with Professor Nordhaus was that he did not take into consideration in this dynamic integrated climate model economy that there could be catastrophic things like tipping points. And so he found some flaws there. Recently, we have Professor Rockstrom from Brandenburg, Germany, who is another climate scientist who has told us that 3-degree warming is a disastrous outcome for humanity. And there's a wonderful video you can watch here that he just came out with this year from Davos. And so look at what our president's budget says. I call it gambling with the dice. It says things like, we're going to cut the National Science Foundation's General Research and Education Grant Program for climate and energy because of the dubious public value of research on speculative impacts from climate scenarios. It sounds to me a reflection of Professor Nordstrom's ideas that climate change models of economics using cost-benefit analysis need not focus on the extreme events, the tipping points and things like that, which Professor Weitzman's research did focus on, and Professor Rockstrom. So, as I mentioned, this is the book I'm using in my class, Fixing the Climate, Experimentalist Governance Theory for an Uncertain World. It's decentralized, it's adaptive for policy making, and it has certain features as well as for regulation. I'm going to try to talk a little bit more about regulation unless we run out of time. So the big things about it, again, it's decentralized, so it can work locally, nationally, internationally, and it's very adaptive, very flexible for both the policymakers as well as the regulation. And just to get at the last speaker, I mean, the regulations aren't necessarily as good as we'd want for solar, but the state of Missouri stepped up, fixed a little bit of that with a new law and reg. And they did that with some policy making as well, I'm sure. The other big thing is that it's characterized by multiple actors. So you get the government involved, you get private organizations, civil society, and the key is collaboration, not competition, collaboration. It's a race to innovate and accept changes away from the status quo. Change is really hard for people. So it features certain things. The goal setting has to be very flexible. You have to be willing to change and allow, again, local adaptation, embracing uncertainty. We don't know exactly all the solutions, but we know a lot of them. And decentralized experiments. So you have iterations, you have different sectors, the aviation industry, the solar industry, the renewable industry, the cement industry, the agriculture industry. And not all of those are, it depends on the location and not just the sector that you're in. So you allow people in their location and in their sector to test different approaches. So you're encouraging innovation. The other main feature is feedback and monitoring. So you allow people to report. Here's what was successful. Here, a hard thing to report. Here's what didn't work. You get peers to talk to one another and assess, oh, this is how it worked on my house when we installed solar panels. Here's a contractor to avoid. So you have to have that peer to peer consultation and feedback and monitoring. And then you also need a mechanism to track your progress and identify overarching strategies. Another thing you want to do with this kind of governance is scale up so that you get more feedback and you continue to learn. It's a circle. You do a revision and you scale up and you try something new again. And this last part is critical. You have to make the status quo risky. My example earlier, having $1 trillion in US dollars, 1 trillion, be subsidizing the fossil fuel industry is pretty much saying, hey, status quo is not risky at all. The government's going to continue to, allow you to extract these fossil fuels and all the financing that goes along with that. It's not encouraging what we need. So you have to somehow make the status quo risky and instead encourage this experimentalism. And what does that mean? The bottom line, it means that you have to put the public interest above the private interest of making money on your 401k, the private interest, your retirement account, the funds that we put our money in, the money market funds. And so your private interests right down at the individual level, all the way up to the big banks that continue to fund fossil fuel exploration, to the big governments that continue to subsidize the fossil fuel extraction, these extractive industries. So what you can do in this incentive to make the status quo risky is what this book calls penalty default. And it's not necessarily a monetary penalty. It may be a way of excluding people from certain markets. Limiting cap and trade is a way to limit a market. So this is really important, that you have to have all of these features to have your experimentalist approach work. So I'm going to skip this slide in the interest of time. It's just a little bit more about too much detail. It's just, I'm going to skip this one. There's a example at the very, very small local level of food safety that occurred in Seattle. And so this is how experimentalism really works, and how you bring in deliberation and all those features that I just talked about. They had a problem in Seattle. All of the food inspectors were doing their own thing. They weren't even necessarily following the risk assessments that they were supposed to follow. They were just doing checklists, and they would go from one facility to the next to do a food inspection, and each inspector was coming out with vastly different food ratings. And so the restaurant industry was up in arms. Hey, depending on who comes, I pass or I fail. So they tried this experimentalist governance approach, and it worked. And the main component that they worked on was deliberation. There it is. So what they had was, not necessarily did they have this problem, but it is a common problem where the experts don't necessarily agree on the whole problem. And so you want to incorporate not only the experts in your peer review, but also lay experience. And this can avoid things like groupthink and individualism. So the problem they had in Seattle was individualism. By adding some expertise into their teams, and by adding peer review, they could get to a place where they had better decision making, and they still avoid what's called groupthink. So what they did was, instead of sending one inspector out to a food establishment, they sent them in groups of 2. And then they had to check on each other, as well as when they came back to the office, they had after action problem solving. They called them huddles. I don't really like that word, but they stuck together with their group of 2, and then they shared with other groups of 2, other partners, and they switched partners. And then not only did their huddle include all the frontline inspectors, they would have open discussion with their supervisors. So, and they would invite the experts in to say, oh, look, this ethnic food, we really don't know what it is. We're not sure how it fits in with our checklist. And it ended up to be very successful. They actually got a whole new risk assessment and a new kind of approach that wasn't the checklist approach. And it meant, in the end, those frontline workers felt that they could have more self-determination, and they didn't have to, in the long run, they didn't have to keep up the dual process. They could go back to one inspector, but they had better human health protection, and they had a new risk assessment method, and not just the checklist anymore. And so they also felt more comfortable relying and consulting on the experts and the specialists. So this was a situation where deliberation was the key to solving their problem. So that's how it was done, this experimentalism in governance at a very, very local level. So when people always say, oh, what's wrong with the way things are, because they know something's wrong, they were so inconsistent in their reviews. And the first thing they stopped saying was, oh, we always do it this way. So even the little things like that were significant. Another example of experimentalism in governance that's just now being undertaken is in the civil aviation department. International Aviation is an organization. I'm trying to think of the exact name of it. I don't see it on my slide here, but there's an organization called something like, the International Labor Organization, but it's the International Organization for Civil Aviation. And that is obviously because these planes fly all around the world from country to country. And we know that aviation is under pressure to mitigate its climate impacts. They are contributing approximately 5% of global greenhouse gases. But it's a terrible situation. Jet fuel is very much a fossil fuel. And how do we get something new? And so these folks have got together with Europe and the United States, and they are a small group of highly motivated actors, and they are initiating an experimentalist program. And it's the idea is they have a critical mass of actors facing strong incentives to identify solutions. So we've got people, we've got those participants that I talked about earlier, the actors, and then we don't know. It's a completely unknown what kind of alternatives they're going to develop. A lot of people are pushing ethanol as a solution, jet fuel made from ethanol, but other people are pushing back against that. Oh, that's not going to work. So they've already started performing these, this group has already started getting together, searching for alternatives through experiments, assessments, and they're very flexible. They're adjusting their goals. So one of the other problems here is that this is a problem of wealthy people causing more than their fair share of greenhouse gas emissions. So we need an equitable transition as well here. And that raises a concern. How will we perhaps curtail or change the use of private jets by wealthy individuals who are contributing more than their share towards greenhouse gas emissions? So I'm running out of time, and I'm going to spend just a couple more minutes going through these slides because it's really much more significant is the success of the California grid in integrating renewables. I'm going to skip that one. But this is a regulatory problem, and skip that one. So what they did in California is first thinking about rooftop solar. So if you go out to California, you see tons, sunny California, you just see these solar rooftops everywhere. And that gives us the option, the component of this experimentalism in context, in location. And so it's working, but they did have some problems. It wasn't working successfully 100%. They had to completely reimagine their grid, and they've been doing this for decades, evolving their power grid. We would like things to change rapidly, but the faster you go, the more frustration you're going to have in making these kind of changes. So you don't want to have brute force improvisation and struggles for power. Innovation is ineffective when you're relying on a finished product and fixed legal positions. So again, that's the flexibility. So this is really what I wanted you to see, how complicated their grid system is. California is just huge. They have almost 40 million people, and they've been working on this for a long time. And it's not just one grid. It's more than 10 or so. So skip that. This is the last slide I think I'll show in light of time, because it it shows how flexible California has been. And it also shows this nice picture of change. You know, when we go through change over time, it's sort of like the 5 stages of grief. And we have to adjust ourselves before we ever get to acceptance. You know, we're in shock, we deny, get frustrated, depressed, then we experiment, then we get to decision making and integration. So that's kind of what California went through. They had to change some of their goals over time. They had to, obviously, the weather is variable, so they had to adapt to that for their grid management. And politics is always an issue. Let's see if there's anything else to talk about. Oh, this is your homework. Go to the video of Professor Mark Zachary Jacobson and watch this video about renewable energy goals. He has been working on this for almost 2 decades, and he's out in California and professor of civil and environmental engineering at Stanford. And his information is fabulous. And I encourage you very much to go to this video.